Very welcome. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, as I was just saying before, I mean, you are a powerhouse. It's just getting ready for this call today. I mean, scaling so many businesses now. You've got a big challenge in front of you coming on board. I think what was it? It was I think the number was something like triple in size in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
With CNI. So
Mhm.
I mean, they brought on such a dynamic leader with your background in starting companies, helping to grow companies, seeing the marketing, sales side, revenue growth side, modeling, all of that good stuff. So we'll get into a little bit of that, but before we do, I'll let you do a little bit more of an introduction. You've got quite the story and author. I mean, like, the list goes on. So yes.
Yes, I've had a pretty interesting life. So interesting that Forbes said they wanted to publish it, which I know we'll dig into today. So I won't have a super long intro here. But I didn't have the best upbringing. And when I was 22 years old, I stumbled upon a professional career. I grew up in the performing arts. I thought I was going to be a professional dancer, and that was derailed. I got in a car accident when I was 18, and I entered into a really dark period of my life. So at 22, when I stumbled upon this opportunity to take an admin role with a payroll company, I didn't realize that it was going to forever change my life. So I started in that role. I ended up transitioning into sales, becoming the number one rep against everyone's desire to see me succeed. But I did it. And then I left after 5 years, took a VP of sales and marketing position with one of my clients. And
Mhm.
that was a big title for a young lady, but had tremendous success. We were able to quadruple the size of that company in 7 months. It always sounds more impressive than it is. It was a small company, but still, nonetheless,
Oh,
I
yes.
fell in love with revenue scaling. So I started my first firm at age 28 as a business strategist with a focus on go to market marketing and sales. And I help startups and entrepreneurs build their business plan with a focus on how to have that rapid growth out of the gate. I did that for 3 years, also dabbled in youth entrepreneurship education, made a lot of rookie mistakes as a first time CEO, and didn't know how to grow my own company through delegation and building on a team. I ended up becoming a starving entrepreneur. So I closed up that business, went back to the payroll company for 3 more years, sold millions, and ended up selling one of the top 10 largest deals in company history with my small business partner. Took
Nice.
that six-figure commission check, left, started my second company, and I ran that for 5.5 years, and we actually had some success with that. So we were able to, a small team when we started, we did about 500,000 in our first year, tripled in size in our second year. Third year did 2.2. That was COVID. And then in our fourth year, we took the company to 3.6 million, which was what was on the books, but we were at a run rate of 5 million with 28 employees. So really in 4 years time, we scaled it from 0 to 28 and 4 million in revenue. That was exciting. But then I entered into a really tough period in my life, got burnt out as a CEO, was starting to question what I was put on this planet for, what I wanted to do, and started this journey actually of figuring out what I wanted in the next chapter. And so very recently I made the leap. I resigned as CEO from my company and took a full-time position with one of our clients. The company is called House of Revenue, and we are revenue scaling experts. So we would take these, what we call second stage scale companies that are looking at growing and figuring out how to build real revenue engines where marketing, sales, customer success are all working together. And we'd go on fractionally, help them build that engine, and then help take them to market and help them grow their revenue. Well, one of our clients was Payroll Network, and I'm from the payroll industry. So I fell in love and ended up working on contract as the chief revenue officer. And I knew this. I knew this is my new home. And so
Yeah.
I ended up resigning, took a full-time position in the beginning of 2023 as chief revenue officer. And yes, I have said yes to a tripling in size goal. I've had the privilege of doing this with other companies, and I'm so ready. And I'm a few months into this job, and it is by far the greatest job I've ever had in my life. Better than the one I created for myself, which is surprising because a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs like they build their dream job. And I think it was that way for the first few years, but it changed and I wasn't happy anymore. So now I found it and I'm having the time of my life.
Oh my goodness. So quite the story. Incredible to see the growth and what you've been able to do for so many companies, and also just to be able to have your pulse on, the entrepreneurship side of things, right?
Mhm.
I love that you started, I think you said an admin at a payroll company. You're
Yeah.
right. So you've seen it from so many levels, and now seeing it from this perspective and that lens, I think adds such value. So, okay, we could get into all of that, which I want to get into flavors of that too, but I want to swing back to the book. So why the book? Like, tell me what,
Yeah.
I know you talked about, you've got this relationship with Forbes and you're going through that process, but like what kind of even sparked this idea? Was it them that approached you? I'd love to hear more
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, they did approach me. They approached me in May of last year. And funny story. So in 2020, when COVID hit, everybody was forced to be at home. I had to reinvent some of the things we were doing inside of our business, but I kind of got bored. I mean, I was working 100 hours a week as a startup and scale up CEO. COVID changed that, which I'm grateful for. And I found some extra time on my hands. So in 2020, I actually partnered up with a very famous sales author who I'm not going to name here, and I wanted to write a book. So I started a manuscript working with him as my coach, and he is one of the selling most authors in the sales category. And he's just so tremendous. But he wanted to take my story in a really interesting direction where I was coming across as this badass in sales and, I like kind of cutthroat and win at all costs. And I used to be that way. And it's actually part of my story that I really had to heal from is I don't want to be that person. And I would never want to write a book about being a number one sales rep and modeling it in a way that I want other people to follow in my footsteps. I actually wasn't the nicest person in my 20s. I wasn't kind and caring the way that I am now. I was very broken on the inside and finding ways to heal those wounds and holes through success and recognition and money, which that's not healthy, FYI. And so this book, by the time he took it to his publisher and it was written, they read it. And then I had some personal things in there from my story, and they wanted it all stripped out. They're like, we don't want to know anything about her upbringing. We don't want to know about this transition after the fact of like her new perspective. We really just want to publish how to become a number one sales rep. And
Mhm.
I didn't feel right about it. And so I backed out of the deal and I said, that's not the story I'm feeling led to tell. I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of sales books out there on how to be a top rep.
yeah,
I need to write a different story about how that's not the answer in life, that
yeah.
there's so much more and that we were created for so much more rather than just titles and money and recognition and being number one. So I tabled it. It just sat, collected dust for, lack of a better term.
Wow.
And when Forbes reached out and they're like, hey, we came across your profile, we've been researching some of the stuff that you've done, and we very much would like to take you down the process to vet your work and put you in front of the council, see if we can get approval to publish you. And I said, well, I actually have a manuscript. And they thought, oh, okay, well, that could speed up the
Start.
process. Let's read it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I sent it over and I had done a pretty extensive interview with them on the front end. And then they looked at the manuscript and they came back and they said, these two don't match up. We met you and we heard your story, but then we read this book and it just didn't feel authentic. It felt
Mhm.
like a how-to book. It felt like such a small portion. And I said, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, yeah.
They said, we want to publish your story,
Mhm.
not how to be a number one rep. And that's when my heart exploded. And I thought, well, okay, a few things. We need to make sure we're talking clearly here.
Yep.
I'm a very outspoken woman of faith, and I need to make sure that my faith is spoken in truth and gets to be published because there is no book or story outside of who I am as a Christian woman. They're like, not a problem. And I said, the other thing is like, you're a business brand. So I'm just making sure we're all on the same page that this story, yes, I have scaled through being a number one rep and being a two-time founder and CEO, and I'm also now an investor and now chief revenue officer. And I'm like, yes, there are notes and undertones and themes of business, but this really is
Yes.
my life story. And they said, not a problem. This is the story we want to tell because we need people to understand that it isn't just those front facing items of being a top rep or being a CEO or scaling a company, that there's so much more behind that. And so, yeah, we entered into a contract for not one, but two books. But the first one is my life story, everything we just talked about. The second one will come out down the road. It is more of a tactical revenue scaling playbook, but I need some more time to write that.
Okay, so the first book, when should we expect it to come out then? What's
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
available September 19th in 2023, and the pre-order link is available now. It's called Destination Remarkable: Surviving the Dark Side of Success.
we'll make sure to include a link too to all of that. So, okay, just to circle back. So you basically scrap the first piece of it. You're like water under the
Mhm.
bridge, which is so authentic, right? That's hard. That's hard. You listen to your authentic self, but that's hard to do when you've already made that much progress and invested that much time. So, I mean, even just listening to some of your podcasts leading up to this, I mean, what you're putting out there is vulnerable, it's bold, it's probably scary. I mean, where have you found kind of the courage or what has led you to be able to put this out there? Are you is the intent to help others kind of like lift up others? One of the quotes I think you have on your website is this, it's this the idea of being significant, right? And I love just like I love to hear more about what that means to you and how you bring that into the workplace, how you bring that into your book on a day to day. So
I was so scared for so many years of my career to ever admit that I made a mistake. I was a perfectionist, and I was just deathly scared that anyone would ever think I was anything less than perfect. My childhood and upbringing, I had an alcoholic mother, and the verbal and mental abuse was so difficult for me to grow up under and understand how to be as a human. I always felt I was never good enough and that everything was wrong. And so a lot of that carried into my desire to succeed because I was constantly just trying to prove to myself that I could be successful, that I could win. And I hid every vulnerability. I made sure that nobody ever saw 1 ounce of weakness from me. I became a very strong, independent woman with a hardened heart. And I, at no cost, would ever let anybody know what was truly going on because I never wanted to create doubt that I couldn't accomplish something or do something. So it's a very sad way to get through life, just so we're clear. But
yeah.
when I entered into my early 30s, I became a Christian when I was 29 years old. I started a process of healing and started a whole new, well, that's why they call it a rebirth, but a whole new way of living. And the first thing I had to do was heal all of those holes and wounds in my heart. And when I realized through that healing how broken I was, I there were days that I just couldn't believe I had lived my life the way that I had lived it. And what I thought was there are other people out there that are like me. And nobody ever showed me the way. Nobody ever mentored me. Nobody ever showed me a different way of living. I had mentors. I had people that believed in me and developed me professionally, and they were amazing.
Right.
But I never had that person that just modeled for me the fact that it's okay to not be okay
Yep.
and that it's okay to not have it together because the DNA, what was ingrained in me growing up was that when I wasn't okay or when I did something wrong or something that wasn't perfect, there was a very massive negative repercussion. And so I built this fabric of my life that I could never make a mistake because I just did not want to deal with the wrath of the consequence of what it was to not be perfect. And so there was so much healing and acknowledging that I'm actually perfectly made as an imperfect woman and that that's okay. And
Right.
so all of a sudden, when I gave myself permission to not have to have it all together every single day, this whole new world opened up for me. And I just felt like I grew so much stronger. And I started to acknowledge I'm growing in comfort in telling my story. I have this new confidence and courage that I can share what has transpired and that it might help open up that door or that conversation for the next person to look in the mirror and say, maybe it's okay if I'm also, not 100% okay. And so what's interesting is when I started to do that, it really took some people by surprise in my network because I had always been up to that point this perfect,
Yep.
polished, well-spoken
Yep.
ninja when it came to anything. I have been on so many stages, podcasts, interviews, you
Yes.
name it, with flawless
Yep.
execution. So when they saw a different side of me, it was surprising for a lot of people. But then the best thing happened. I had message upon message upon message upon message of how encouraging and meaningful it was to prove that point. There is a podcast interview that I did on a really well known podcast in the revenue, sales, marketing space.
Yes.
And the guy every May he reposts this interview. So it's a few years old, and he reposts this interview because it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And on this episode, I do not know why, I just felt so led and so compelled to just.
Share. Yeah.
And this episode, he circulates it every May, and he's circulating it right now. And the messages pouring into my LinkedIn DMs are the most heartwarming, affirming messages from men and women. It's
Mm.
very personal about becoming a mother and all that, and the mental health challenges that I had and being a working professional. And holy smokes, those messages give me every ounce of courage, confidence, and fuel in the tank to continue to go down this path, even when it may be a little bit inconvenient for me as a professional. But Lauren, really the biggest thing is I've stopped caring what other people think, because I'm right with the Lord and I'm right in my heart. And I know the plans that God has for me. And creating me wasn't a waste, and I'm not a mistake, and I am good enough. And I am perfect in his image, and he created me to go through the life that I did, and now I have the story to tell, and I believe that that story is what is helping other people navigate their own journeys. And so I will forever stand proud on this podium and share this message as long as he has me on the podium.
So amazing. So I also feel like not only is it coming from a place of vulnerability, but it's normalizing, right? And Laura alluded, normalizing, I think, just life, right? Different challenges that people go through, all different variants, different shades of gray, if you will. And I think that you're also bringing it in a way where you're putting yourself out there, but as you alluded to earlier, like you've got like people you encourage, like business coaches and professional coaches, but you're not always talking about those under pieces. And I feel
Yeah.
like some of that is it shows up in weird ways that you don't even realize. And so if you're getting to that core, and if you're at least putting yourself out there, it's helping to, I think, not just bring up the next generation, but other people that are around you. So it's kind of yeah, it's oh man, I'm excited for this book. So, and that you're willing to share, right? Like, because that's a
Yeah.
scary thing to do. I think, especially in those worlds where it's so digital and it can be so,
Mhm.
it can catch fire in a different kind of way. So, yeah.
Yes, and I've been so private about it, even in my marriage and with my new family. And spoiler alert, I don't have a relationship with my birth family anymore, but I got married into the most amazing, amazing family that ever existed. And my mother-in-law is like my mom now, and she has been for the last 10 years. And I love her so much, and she's so good to me. And I got through the final stages of proofreading, and I have read this book cover to cover so many times. And they asked me to proofread one last time. And I said, I can't. I've read it so many times and I've lived it. So there's going to be typos in there and I won't see them.
I
So
hear
I
you. I
asked
know
my
how it
mother-in-law,
goes. Oh my
I
gosh. I
asked
know.
her if she would read it cover to cover. And I've been so private about the things in my life. And I told her and I warned her, there was a disclaimer, take your time with this. But she said she couldn't put it down. And she read it straight through pretty much. I mean, and then afterwards, she just needed to sit like in silence and digest. And she couldn't even come up with the words of what to say to me afterward. And she finally got the words together and called me, and she just could not believe what I have endured and what I have been through. And she cannot believe the output and the product of the woman I am today based on what I came from. And she was just so kind and loving in the words that she shared, and how grateful that she is, that I'm in her family and that I married her son and we created this amazing, beautiful boy, my son. And that we include her in everything that we do, and that she's such an important part of my life, which usually mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws, they just don't have that tight of a bond and relationship. But she was definitely taken aback, and it was also very encouraging for her to tell me how moved she was, the fact she couldn't put it down. And she says it's just so crazy, like, I've known you for the last 10 years. I've known you for at least almost 25% of this story. And there's so much I didn't know in the battles that you were fighting and what you were dealing with. And anyway, so I really do hope that people understand in this book, like, yes, it was very difficult to put pen to paper, things my husband doesn't even know, obviously my mother-in-law didn't even know, but I do feel very compelled that this is going to help people.
Yeah. I think also we show up every day, right? We get to work or going through whatever it is that you're going through, but we're not aware of everything that's happening, right, with others. And so I think it's also that reminder to be kind, to,
I know.
be grateful, to throw people a bone, to, yeah, to help lift up each other, that kind of we concept. So, um, oh my gosh, so many good things. So, um, I know we're close at our time here, but I feel like we could keep going, and I'd love to hear more. I know we'll be able to keep going as the book comes out, and like I said, we'll include links before. Anything that you want to share, I think, as you look ahead, right? Like you've had this journey, the book's getting ready to roll out. There's going to be another one that's going to be off the heels of that
Mhm.
too, right? You're starting this new role. Anything kind of like takeaways you think for folks if they're either stepping into a new role, if they're kind of in that entrepreneur hat, if they're kind of struggling with things? I mean, you've seen it from so many angles. I mean, kind of how do you approach each day, or how do you feel like you can, how do I say, um, uh, better kind of that next step? I love just to
Mhm.
hear, because you've got it from so many lenses. I just kind of love to hear how you approach your lens for really growth, which is what you're doing, right? And pushing. So,
Yes, it's interesting to go from being an individual sales producer to a leader to a
mhm,
CEO to an individual sales producer to a
mhm,
CEO and then now in a leadership position again. And there are so many different lenses. And when you wear those distinct hats, the way that you show up is very different in those roles. And so now that I'm coming off the heels of being that CEO and entrepreneur and stepping back into a leadership position as a chief revenue officer, the way that I approached this was just getting the lay of the land and understanding the way that everything worked. I think that because I'm so fast paced and high urgency and I'm a big problem solver, and usually I could be described as a bull in a china shop. Like I just get in and
you go for it.
and I'm
Yes.
also a little bit of a maverick, and I haven't always been the easiest to get along with because I'm so fast paced and high urgency. So one of the first things that I had to do, because I care so much about Payroll Network, which has recently been rebranded as PNIHCM. And I'm so excited for this journey and I'm looking forward. Like, this isn't going to be a quick stop for me. I want to be here. I want to be here for like a big, big chapter of my life. And
Yeah.
I had a decision to make when I first embarked on that. I know what I'm capable of, and I've had to be this lone wolf maverick for the last 5.5 years as a CEO. And, everything like the buck stopped with me. I
Mhm.
made the decisions. I was five executives in one and did execution and client work. They call it the chief everything officer. I didn't have a lot of people I could rely on. I also didn't have people that I really had in my circle that I could evaluate decisions with because I was the tip of the spear. And walking into this scenario with an unbelievable team of accomplished, loving, caring, knowledgeable, brilliant executives, I had to reframe how I was going to show up and do work
Mm.
because that's a very different environment
Yeah.
going from five executives in one to actually having five executives, actually we have seven. And
Yes.
so it was a whole shift for me to go in. So I got the lay of the land. I learned who the people were. One of my favorite courses in college was about organizational behavior theory and management and understanding the inner workings of each person and how they fit into a larger puzzle. And then deciding how you're going to show up and how you fill in on that, how you communicate, how you align with others so that you can be woven into the fabric of that team and not be the disruptor or the person who's kind of sitting out on the sidelines and like how do you
Mhm.
truly get integrated. So for me it was a lot of being curious and observing and asking questions and diving in a little bit here and then pulling back a little bit, diving in, pulling back a little bit. There was a little bit of friction at first, had to figure people out. They needed
Yes,
to figure
fair.
me out, but
Yes.
then I had a data set that I could start to interpret and make decisions from on how I was going to fit into this leadership team and really be honored and valued in my role because I've never had a chief revenue officer, so it wasn't specific to me, but really like what I can bring to the table or a CRO could bring to the table. And
Right.
so doing that level of investigative work on the front end, I think was what was so transformative in
Mhm.
building what the path was to go forward. And so because of that initial time, I guess, an investment on the front end, now we are this one cohesive unit. We so genuinely care about each other. We know what our shortcomings are, and there's a lot of grace. There's no finger pointing. Like we're just able to identify, like, hey, this isn't so and so specialty. Maybe it's fallen on their plate in the past. Let's move that
Yep.
Let's figure this out. So now we are able to take this goal of tripling in 5 years and we're able to tackle it because we have alignment. That wouldn't
Mhm.
have been possible if I just came in like, I'm going to handle this and blah, 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 blah,
Yep.
which I've been known to do in the past. So I think that's my biggest just takeaway from being in transition, going into this new role. And hopefully that's helpful advice to people. Like winning together is a lot more fun. I've had to learn that.
Absolutely. No, that's so fair, and it's easier said than done too, right? So and
Hmm.
it also takes a certain volume of resources and the right players in the right seats, as you alluded to earlier, and clarification on strategy and all these kinds of things to be able to come together to do that. So it's so much easier said than done. But it sounds like you're sinking into a great new home, and I'm excited to see what's going to come out of all of it. I think not just only for the organization and the growth goals and being able to shape it up, but then also just for your journey as you're going to be able to help share this and I think spread it to an even wider network too. So um,
Thank you.
thank you for your time and for sharing a little bit more, for giving us a little bit of a teaser for what's to come too. And um, we'll, like I said, we'll link to the book and some of those resources, that podcast. I'd love to listen to that podcast that you mentioned and go from there. So thank you again, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll be in touch soon.